Hello and welcome to Edukemy's YouTube channel. My name is Harsh Singh, and in this video we shall discuss the report presented by Human Rights Watch on the World Report of Human Rights. And in this count, we will understand what are the global implications of human rights violations, what have been the strategies adopted in the country, what are the kind of reports that the report speaks of on India in specific. So before we begin, let me welcome all the people here: Hima, Amlan, Kim, Kriti, Ashish, Bhavani, all of you people and people watching offline. Welcome to all of you. Let's begin this. The question to be addressed towards the end. All right. So speaking about the human rights, one of the important bodies for preservation of human rights in the country is National Human Rights Commission. It was formulated after the Paris Agreement in 1991, and it conforms to the norms, global norms on human rights, right? So India already has had almost all the human rights in some or the other form in fundamental rights. For example, right to speech, right to speech, right? Article 19, right to freedom, right to profess the religion that they want, Article 24, Article 32 for right to redress or to be heard, all the kind right to be able to preserve their religion and linguistics, Article 29, 30, right? So every person has been given dignity of treatment and a recourse to judicial intervention as well, right? So what was the need for National Human Rights Commission? This is a mandated question. The reason is that there are specificities on human rights as well. For example, although the redressal has been done through the Supreme Court, however, if we want some investigation to happen, some procedure to be laid down, all this is, or some suo motu cognizance by an authority, this is the National Human Rights Commission, NR, National Human Rights Commission, and State Human Rights Commission, which are the bodies which are going to initiate the procedures, right? Supreme Court and the High Courts can take due cognizance of issues. However, these bodies can also investigate them. They can also seize. They can also work like a civil court and administer over the issues. So that is why these institutions were formed, in addition to providing human rights under the fundamental rights or under the Constitution. Now, if understanding what is the status of human rights can be very easily understood through the type of the political regime that the countries around the world follow. The ones indicated in blue are democratic in nature. So America, the developed world largely, so European side, Western Europe largely, and some parts of Eastern Europe developed enough, parts of South America, Australia, India, please ignore the way India has been depicted, but then India, blue, and then Mongolia here, all of them blue. That means they are democratic countries, multi-party systems are followed. There are countries which follow single party system. Look at the country China there, Iran. So these are the countries which follow single party system and they do not have proper level of democracy. There are countries indicated in yellow. Yellow means multi-party system do exist here. Multi-party system, but then not everybody is allowed to be in power. For example, the party formulated by Mr. Putin in Russia, that is the one that has been winning power all the time. Many countries in Africa also are of the same kind. And then we also have military regimes majorly in African nations, right? They have been respected there, right? Now, after having understood what is happening in the world around, if you look at the state of human rights with the help of Human Rights Watch report, it speaks of important developments. For example, world over it says that there are crises happening. For example, during the times of election in Russia, the participants are being debarred from taking an election. Russia. When you look at a country like China, whenever human rights allegations are imposed on it, China speaks of the kind of GDP power it has had. It speaks of how it is trying to help the world grow and ignore the issues of democracy, right? Then when we speak of human rights against USA, then it automatically alleges multiple things through trade barriers, through non-tariff barriers on the nations. For example, American nationals, American military has been alleged to have conducted excesses in Guatemala, in Iraq, in Afghanistan. All these have been overlooked by the world just because they have got greater power. All quite significant things of these have been mentioned in the report itself. The report speaks of sliding of democracies and furthering of autocracies around the whole world. And some of the reports have very rightly, in previous times, World Freedom Report, they have clearly mentioned that countries like China, countries like Russia, they have decelerated to being completely unfree countries, not democratic at all. India has been called as a partially free country because of the atrocities conducted in the present times, right? So this report sees that autocracy is on the rise, democracy is on the decline, and it has given several examples of the same. Russian candidates being disqualified before elections begin in these places. Along with that, in the name of national security, surveillance has been carried out in all the nations, India included. And that in that respect itself, Europe has initiated its general data protection rules, GDPR. Along with that, Europe also has initiated another law on the intermediaries, online intermediaries, right? So Beijing's quest for international approval, right? It uses GDP numbers to show off its international approval, whereas it has got decreased level of credibility as far as human rights is concerned, right? Human rights at international level against countries and against its own people. Hong Kong is a good example of what is happening in Tibet, example of Xinjiang province. All of these are examples where excesses are being conducted by a country and the whole world is quiet just because it has got global influence in economy, right? So these are the kind of, and please mind, we are speaking of just those countries which are in focus. However, African nations also must be spoken of. However, the nations in South America also must be spoken of, where there is backsliding of democracy and there is further autocracy, and human rights violations are happening in those nations as well, right? So what it observes here are some good things and some bad things about the country. For example, India has abstained from quite a few votes. No, India was the president of United Nations Security Council in August last year. And during that time, certain resolutions were adopted. For example, resolution against Myanmar, right? Atrocities against prisoners of war and people who have been detained. India abstained. Then there was also a resolution on Afghanistan, and India tread very carefully so that the Taliban regime should not be against India. Presently, India is also going through an issue where India is not choosing very carefully. India is being very careful in choosing which side to take while we are speaking of resolutions against Russia. So these are the kind of highlights that have come against India. On the other hand, human rights interventions by India have also been acknowledged. For example, distribution of rice with the help of World Food Program. Another example is India being able to participate in Vaccine Maitri through its initiative, something that only India has done among so many global players. They are hoarding vaccines but not distributing amongst people. So these are some good and examples that can be represented about India's stands related to human rights. All right. Now, inside the country itself, there is a separate issue of human rights violations. Human rights violations against communities, complete community, women community. I keep speaking of violence, for example, intimate partner violence, digital violence, domestic violence, violence at workplaces, sexual harassment at workplaces. These are and people getting stalked at regular places. So this is a violence against a community, comes under human rights. Then violence against specific communities which are marginalized, scheduled caste, scheduled tribes. We keep seeing that in newspapers all the time, but they are realities, have been presented in the report. Then there have been issues which have been reflected of custodial violence. This is violence specific against the police institutions. Custodial violence has been regretted and also have been spoken of in the NCRB reports as well. So 143 deaths in police custody and extrajudicial killings, what we call as encounters. All these are happening in the country and they have been mentioned very much in the report. They have also spoken about internet shutdowns happening in the name of providing security and in the name of integrity and maintaining order in the nation. Yesterday, when we spoke of the issue of demolition and encroachment of the public spaces by individuals, those are also human rights interventions that must be looked at. That is the reason that the Supreme Court had given resort to people residing on the pavements, that they should have the right to be heard. Another example from yesterday's current affairs discussion itself was the right of people not to be phone tapped. So there have to be some interventions. Government has to make some checks and balances, which we discussed yesterday. So those examples can be put immediately when we speak about the human rights of individuals. What are we speaking of? Global level, we speak of COVID vaccinations, we speak of India's effort for providing food at various places, Afghanistan included, and then violations are not participating against Russia, not participating against Myanmar, not acting tough against Taliban, right? Similarly, Sri Lanka as well, whenever there were violations in Sri Lanka, India used to speak initially, but later on it abstained against Sri Lanka. Similarly, when we talk of violence inside the country, community specific violence or atrocities, excesses conducted by a specific agency, for example, police, custodial death, extrajudicial killings, Armed Forces Special Powers Act, all those could be mentioned. All right. Vulnerable groups, abuse of women, girls, children rights, all has increased. School disruptions have declined. What is this? Is it not human right? This is a right of the individual and the duty of the state to provide certain kind of dignified ways of living. Just by the virtue of being born as a human being, we are entailed to certain rights, and those rights the state must provide. It is a part of directive principles of state policy, and some of them have been converted into legislations as well. So there are barriers of justice for persons with disabilities, right? That also has been included in the report, right? What about the people with the LGBTQ community, the third and fourth gender community? They also are deprived of the rights. The government has not been making laws specific to those persons. All right. Okay. So this is the presence of the scope, ambit of the report specific to India. But then India has had a huge record, a long record of presenting human right cases and respecting India's individual human rights. This has been presented in various texts as well, protecting the integrity of every individual, Vasudev Kutum, treating the guest as a god. All these are a part of India's heritage that speaks of human rights and dignified treatment of every individual. And this is where you can also quote, if you know some verses from these scriptures, the Indian and the scriptures which have been accepted by people of India. All right. We can also speak of the directive principles of state policy and the fundamental rights, which somehow entail the human rights. All right. Okay. See, the Human Rights Commission, it largely follows the Paris Principles. The Paris Principles under which the commission was initiated. And please tell me in the comment section whether this commission is a constitutional commission or a statutory commission. So the functions of this commission include working on violation of rights, liberty, equality and dignity of any individual. If it has been violated, it will start initiating or investigating a case on those grounds. In case it finds that there has been some excess conducted, then penalty will be imposed, some sort of compensation will be given, and also a case might be registered and it might be even initiated in the court of law, right? It will try to have abatement of violence, of violation of human rights by public servant. So public servant cannot conduct excesses. This is against the state and in favor of the individual. Here the state has been considered as the most powerful and individuals must be provided right. That is why Human Rights Commission has been initiated. Violation of international treaties to which India is a party. India and this is where the Human Rights Commission also plays a role. For example, United Nations has earmarked what are human rights, and India is a party to those rights. Right? So India has to maintain that these rights are being given to all the people, and that is the reason that whenever there are some extrajudicial killings at some places in the country, the Human Rights Commission, it acknowledges, says that these are the issues here in the country. These reports as well also create some due pressure on the governance in India. So whenever they speak of these issues, India is said to have violated the Human Rights Treaty, and that is why these kind of pressures are imposed on the government. All right. So realization of human rights and role of NGOs have a vital role to play, where they can highlight the suppression being caused to people, where they can put it up in front of the courts. They have been doing a fabulous job in the country, and pressure groups could be created with the help of individuals and the NGOs. All right, statutory, great. Yes, statutory body. So this is how we understand what human rights is about and what this report in specific speaks of, right? So what did we understand here are some aspects of human rights. We understood some things like when we speak of human rights in the country, we have fundamental rights protecting it, and we have clear mention of them through the formation of National Human Rights Commission as well, right? So not only acknowledgement in fundamental rights, but recourse to justice through fundamental rights and through National Human Rights Commission, right? Along with that, we understood what are the kind of positives of human rights in the country and what are the negatives that have been acknowledged. We also understood what vulnerable groups are going through in the country, within the country, and we also understood the examples of foreign nations which are being alleged to have conducted the excesses. Democracy which is getting slided, autocracy on the rise, and we understood what are the important functions of this institution NHRC and how they work. What is the important mandate for this organization? This is how you can understand what human rights is about, how it has to be covered in a topic like this. If a question comes, the question could largely be on analysis of the state of human rights in the country. So have 6-7 vulnerable groups prepared from this list itself. Women as vulnerable groups, marginalized sections, the third gender community, old persons. Look at the human rights, right to work, right? Directive principles being provided for the same, but then are people getting that right to work or right to education? What about the right to education for the small children? You can look at these daily examples through such small insights, just a couple of minutes of thinking, and you will understand what these issues are. So analysis of human rights in the country and what is the mandate for India. Those 4 mandate, they become very important. The 4 mandate which has been mentioned in the block, right? For example, ensuring that a person's liberty, life, and their dignity is maintained. That is a part of the international treaty. India must also oblige to all the international treaties which are related to human rights. So these and excesses conducted by a state authority, they have to be opposed. So these are part of mandate of protection of human rights by the NHRC. Do you remember all this? And this is how we understand today's topic for discussion, that is Human Rights Watch, the global report on human rights 2022. This organization, Human Rights Watch, is a think tank NGO which is present in America and operating for the whole world. All right, let's discuss a couple of questions. One question that was posed by Amlan was, just a bit please. Still looking at the question. Why is everyone asking help from India to solve their island disputes, whether it is Diego Garcia or Falkland Islands? Interestingly, both disputes with UK. See, there is another dispute that is in the news. It is not only Diego Garcia of UK and along with Maldives versus Falkland Islands, and that is for UK versus Argentina. There is also another dispute in question these days, that is of the Falkland Islands, the Kamchatka Peninsula, and those certain islands which are in dispute between Russia and Japan. So this specific issue is in light is because of diplomacy. When the Prime Minister of UK visits India and says that India is a good nation, there were a lot of headlines where he clearly acknowledges India's increasing presence in international fora. They have clearly spoken that he knows that Mr. Prime Minister of India has spoken repeatedly to the Premier of Russia of stopping this war, but has not condemned internationally, right? So these are these diplomatic statements to say that we are in your favor, right? Let us conclude the FTA as soon as possible, complementary economies. And that's the time when we start seeing statements from Argentina, statements from other countries, smaller countries, looking at UK's disputed islands, right? So these are diplomatic issues. India has never been asked for help when we are speaking about the Kamchatka Peninsula and the Sakhalin Islands being taken over by Russia. So it is not just diplomacy, but also that India's stature in the global fora is growing, and that is why India is being called for support. So India, along with China, we just saw in the current affairs video that the IMF projections for India's growth are 8.2%. It is 4.4% for China, and for the whole world it is still low. Developed economies 3.5%. The developing economies just around 4-5%, but India is still growing fast. So this indicates that though employment will be less, but the growth rate will be fast for India. India is the future hub. Many countries around the whole world are rallying behind India for providing workforce to Europe, to South America, to Africa, leading by charge, leading by example. And that's why these smaller nations, they are trying to take support of India whenever the opponent party comes to our country. All right. So this is one way you can look at this. Also, India's growing stature, that is of course there. Another question is, some people in country like China don't think their rights are curtailed. They think it's a West conspiracy. Actually, I spoke to quite a few Chinese nationals and quite a few Indians who came back from China, and they mentioned a similar thing, right? So what is presented as a text in the document, that is different from what people say they perceive in the local areas in China. They say rights are there for everyone to enjoy. It is just that Chinese have a different system. Their technology is different. It is not integrated with what Americans provide. So when we have WhatsApp here, they do not have WhatsApp. They have WeChat. When we have a different www, they utilize something else there. Their technology is indigenously developed and they are utilizing it well. So, but then on the other hand, we also see what is happening in Hong Kong, a place like Hong Kong, local people being beaten by the Chinese police, right? Atrocities being conducted by Chinese administration on Hong Kong, and history being completely twisted against the capitalist economy of China. So yes, that is absolutely true. That this I have also heard that the Chinese people and people in China do not think that their rights are getting curtailed. They only consider it as a conspiracy against the West. See, if we look at what is happening in Kashmir and Northeast and certain other pockets in the country, for example, the left-wing extremism, there is a part of it which is true and there is a part of it which is not true. Both of it is true. So the coin has got two sides. It could be true and it could not be true, depending on the ground realities and the situation, circumstances, times. The evidences also change, right? And the situation also changes. So if the question is asked, we will deal with it with what is available globally, what is in favor of the examination. Suppose it talks about China being one superpower. So we will have to speak about those aspects, developing indigenous potential. But if it speaks about the excesses conducted by China and there is proof about it, then we will acknowledge that as well and mention it. All right. So both of that, this to be represented. Simple example, you people yourself spoke of Japan. So Japan not treating men and women at par. Now, but then do we write that in the examination? We are not writing that in examination, right? We are highlighting the good parts about Japan. But then whenever an issue about Japan comes, we will speak about that as well, right? So that's how we have to deal with these kind of situations. Neutrality, objectivity, and our equanimity, along with the presence of mind for that moment, right? That's how it is to be done. People, if you've got questions, please put it down in the comment section. We will quickly get back to you. And if there are suggestions, inputs, most welcome to put it down. And thank you for participation.